Okay, welcome everybody to this afternoon session. This is the latest edition of the Sustainable Futures seminar series. My name is Stephen Lowe and I'm the new research associate at Sustainable Futures. I've just started this week, so hopefully you get to see me at some point in person over the next few weeks. I'll be chairing the meeting today. We've got two speakers this afternoon. We've got Dr. Alejandro Gallego Schmid, who's a senior lecturer in circular economy and life cycle analysis at the Life Cycle Sustainability Assessment, at Manchester Environmental Research Institute, will be telling us about life cycle assessment and circular economy principles applied to the agricultural sector. And following Alejandro, we've got Dr. Jenna, Ashton, a lecturer in heritage studies at the Manchester Environmental Research Institute, who's going to be talking to us about community climate resilience in Manchester. So we've got two great speakers, and after each talk, we're going to have 10 minutes of Q&A. So please put your questions into the chat box, and I'll put them to the speakers afterwards. So without further ado, if I hand over to Alejandro to kick us off, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for the presentation, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm just gonna share my screen. So, Stephen, can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see them. Yeah, right. Thank you.
So I'm just gonna start. Hi, everyone. So I'm Dr. Alejandro Gallego Schmid, and today I'm going to be talking about life cycle assessment and circular economy principles applied to the agricultural sector. So I don't know how much do you know about circular economy, so I'm going to start a little bit with the definition of circular economy and the main principles. So we live nowadays in a linear economy, which is based on take, make, use, and dispose. I think you can see it very well in this figure. And in all these stages of the life cycle of a product, we are producing waste, not only material, but also we are wasting energy. And you may know that nowadays still 80% of the energy is coming from fossil fuels, okay? And as you can see in this figure, contrary to what normally we think, most of the waste is produced not at the end of life, but during the extraction of the resources and during the making of products. Obviously, this linear economy is inefficient, vulnerable, and wasteful, and it's generating many of the problems that we have nowadays. For example, the plastics that are in the oceans. So just to depress you a little bit more, okay, some more data, more than 90% of the non-renewable materials extracted are wasted during the production process, okay? So 90% of what we extract do not end up as part of the product that we sold. And this is quite related with the figure that I have mentioned before, okay? There is a lot of waste in the production, in the extraction of resources and in the production, okay? More than 80% of the market products are discarded after a single use. And a large portion becomes waste within the 6 weeks of sale. And the clear example of this is a plastic bag that we get in a supermarket, okay, that we use it for a couple of minutes, maybe, or 10 minutes, and then it goes to waste, okay? Obviously, we can discuss the percentage, if it's 80%, if it's 60%, if it's 70%, okay? But what I'm trying to show here, there is a huge percentage of the market products that are discarded after just one single use. And another data that is interesting, some studies say that 80% of the environmental impacts of products and services are determined at the design stage. This is very important, and we are going to be talking about this later on in the presentation, but obviously it's much easier if we design products from the beginning having this circular mentality instead of linear, because that's going to avoid us a lot of problems, okay? But today we are going to talk about agriculture. So how does agriculture contribute to the linear economy? For example, the global irrigated area has grown annually an average of 1.3% between 1940 until nowadays, okay? And the demand for food is expected to grow 70% by 2050. And this is not only because we are going to have more people in the world, it's because also we are going to have more middle class. Okay, thanks God. Countries like India and China, they are developing and they are having much more middle class, okay, that require another type of food and they require more food, okay. Agricultural activity and land conversion for agricultural use is the leading cause of soil erosion, which is a huge problem that we have nowadays, and it's the second global threat for the preservation of biodiversity. So agriculture is behind of these two big problems. But not only that, if we consider agriculture and agri-food industry as a big sector, is the second sector that consume more resources, okay, they has the highest material footprint, and it's the fourth regarding carbon footprint, regarding the contribution to climate change, okay, behind mobility, consumables, and construction, okay. So after depressing you guys a little bit, okay, we have a solution. Houston, we have a problem, but Houston, we have a solution. We have a new economic paradigm with this circular economy, which is an alternative to this linear economy that I have shown in the previous slides, okay? There is a lot of definitions of circular economy. There is one study that have quantified up to 114 different definitions of circular economy, but there is quite an agreement regarding the principles of circular economy, and this is related with the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And the first principle is to regenerate natural systems. So basically what we are aiming here is to use less finite and fossil resources and trying to use better renewable resources. Principle 2 is to keep products and materials in use. And we can do this through reuse, remanufacturing, refurbishing. And principle 3 is related with the fact that, as we are going to be discussing later on, circularity per se does not make sense. Circularity only makes sense if it contributes to the regeneration and it contributes to sustainability. So the third principle is to design, again, remember that I mentioned it before, design out waste and pollution in order to improve the environmental, social, and economic sustainability, okay? So, okay, now we have cleared the concept of circular economy, but how do we apply this? What are the circular economy strategies? First of all, we have narrowing, using less. This is the one that is closer to a linear economy, because basically what we are trying here is to optimize, okay? So it's try to have the same products, but using less materials. So for example, I have my mobile here with me. So trying to produce this mobile, same type of mobile, but with less materials. The second strategy is to slowing, is to use for more time. So following the same example of the mobile, try to design a mobile that lasts for 4 years instead of 2. Obviously, in that case, we are going to be using less materials during the 4 years, okay? And close with this to use again. And in this case, for example, when we cannot use that mobile anymore, trying to look for potential uses of the materials or components of that mobile, or it can be for another mobile, or can be for other purpose. But obviously, we want always to upcycling. What we don't want is that the quality of the material is downcycled. And the last one is to regenerate. And this one is clearly related with agriculture. Okay, this is to make it clean, to regenerate the ecosystems. Okay, so this is the quite famous diagram of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Okay, and in recent years, the part in blue, with this the technical part, the technical nutrients, you know, plastics, metals, okay, have been developed quite a lot. But we noticed that the green part, with this the one related with biomaterials, with organic materials, have not been so well developed, okay, and particularly the part of agriculture, which is specifically mentioned in this butterfly diagram, okay? So that's the reason that we initiated a research in how to adapt all these circular economy concepts to agriculture, okay? So the first thing is that we thought that, as I mentioned before, circularity per se doesn't have sense, so it has to be sustainable. So what we aim is that a circular agriculture, or agriculture that embrace the principles of circular economy, has to be sustainable. That means that have to be sustainable from the economic perspective. And here I put just some examples, that mean that agriculture is still an economic pillar that can work without subsidies, for example, that is sustainable environmentally. I don't know if you guys are aware of the concept of planetary boundaries, okay? But there is this study that has established the 9 main planetary boundaries, and at what level are we surpassing them or not. And you can see here in this graph in black, these triangles are those planetary boundaries and how we are surpassing them. Okay, and in green is the contribution of agriculture. And you can see, for example, particularly with the planetary boundaries related with nutrients, okay, we are already in the red zone for nitrogen and for phosphorus, and a huge contribution of that is from agriculture, okay? So we aim to reduce that pressure if we want to have a sustainable agriculture. And that is sustainable socially. That means that we have food security, that we are able to eradicate poverty associated to agriculture, and, for example, to improve health and living conditions of the people that work in agriculture, okay? But we have to add also the circular economy part. So we want an agriculture that is efficient in the use of resources, again, using the concepts of narrowing, slowing, and closing, and I'm gonna give some examples later on. And that is regenerative, so that maintain and improve ecosystem services. So after thinking quite a lot about this, we came with this definition of what does it mean circular economy when we apply to to agriculture. It's in an article that we published last year. So it's the set of activities designed to not only ensure economic, environmental, and social sustainability, okay, in agriculture, that's the sustainability part, through practices that pursue the efficient and effective use of resources, okay, here we start with the circular economy part, in all phases of the value chain, but also guarantee the regeneration of biodiversity in agrosystem and the surrounding ecosystem. This definition was necessary because, as far as we are aware, there were not a definition of how we should implement the principles of circular economy to agriculture, or what does it mean agriculture in the area of circular economy. Okay, so let's see some examples regarding narrowing. And again, we can discuss many other examples, okay? But for example, in the case of narrowing for agriculture, it means that we have to aim to apply the correct dosage of nutrients, okay? Remember that I mentioned the problem regarding planetary boundaries and nutrients. So that's something that we have to aim, okay? We are putting too much fertilizers, and all of them are not absorbed, we are not using the correct dosage, and that's generating a lot of problems, okay? We have a problem regarding matching production with demand, okay? This is related as well with, for example, these rules that the supermarket has regarding how different fruits, vegetables have to be, okay? That's changing nowadays, we are starting to see these campaigns of eat ugly vegetable and fruits, okay? But that was a problem until recently, okay? Obviously, we were having problems with those fruits and vegetables that didn't meet the standards, okay? But also, I don't know if all of you are aware, but 1/3 of the food that is produced in the world goes to waste, okay? And obviously that's related with planning, but also with the education of the consumers, okay? So we have to aim to educate consumers in order that we don't generate food waste in our homes, okay? And then we go to the part of slowing that was a little bit more complicated for us because we are talking about perishable products, you know, so how we expand the life of, or how do we lengthen the life of these products. There is potential solutions, you know, technical solutions that allow us to preserve food. For example, this company, Appeal Innovation, that they have mentioned that actually they have been inspired by circular economy. Basically, what they have developed is an organic peel that can be applied to vegetables, to fruits, you know, and that have no color. You can eat it without any problem, and it goes. You can get rid of it just with water, and it protects, or it lengthens the life of fruits and vegetables for up to 50% more. Okay. We can also aim, for example, to use foods, that kind of foods that I mentioned before with defects or they are not so nice, in other products like salads or jams, okay? Or develop more resistant varieties. For example, I don't know if you know persimmon, but this fruit that has been developed with a tougher skin, and that allows to slow down or to lengthen the life of this agricultural product, okay? Closing cycle is something that we are, I think all of us are quite familiar. We are talking about developing compost, biochar. We can obtain bioenergy, for example, through anaerobic digestion, or start to obtain interesting products from things that we are not using at the moment. For example, it has been discovered that from pineapple steam, we can obtain bromelain, which is an enzyme that can be used in medicine. And regarding regenerate, as I mentioned before, is to maybe in the case of biodiversity, of ecosystem, is not anymore enough by being sustainable due to the damage that we have already done. We have surpassed planetary boundaries, so we have to aim to be regenerative. And in the case of agriculture, that means using crop rotation, reducing ploughing, using organic fertilizers, or aiming for agroecology and silvopastoral systems, okay? Just to give you an example, okay? This is the sample of a company in Spain that produce avocados. And so basically, if the avocado meets the commercial specification, that's fine. It goes it is sold as a fresh product, okay? But if not, it is here when it starts all the circular economy strategies, you know? The slowing strategy that they have is that they produce with that guacamole, that avocado that doesn't mean the commercial specifications, they produce guacamole, okay? So they are lengthening the life of the product, okay? But also they use the waste from that product for cosmetic and animal feed production. Here we are having a clear example of a closing strategy, okay? And also they aim to restore the soil with prunings and other waste fertilizers. This is a regenerating strategy. We are regenerating the ecosystem. We are regenerating the soil. But in general, this company have a narrowing strategy. They try to optimize all the processes and all the inputs, and that implies a correct use of water, fertilizers, energy, and waste. So I hope with this example, you have much more clear how can we, in a specific example, how can these principles of circular economy being applied, okay? But another thing that we did in that piece of research is that we analyzed how many indicators were available related with circular economy and sustainability, okay? What we saw, we found in the literature up to 41 indicators related with circular economy. Plenty of them were technical with the aim of optimizing. Remember that I mentioned before the narrowing is the strategy that from circular economy that is closer to the linear economy, okay? So trying to optimize what we are doing at the moment. Regarding the analysis of the sustainability of circular economy, we saw that there was quite a lot of environmental indicators, but they were mainly focusing climate change, okay? There was not a real measure of the real damage that it was produced, and it was quite shocking that there were not indicators measuring the effects of land use change, okay? Regarding economic indicators, they were quite abundant as well, but we found that there was not an assess of the economic impact of the regeneration, okay, of regenerating the ecosystem. You know, what was the economic implication of that? And social indicators were totally underrepresented. Something that we saw is that in those studies, these indicators were used individually. So there was a lack of a multidisciplinary and holistic analysis considering technical, environmental, economic, and social indicators. So that's something that we have to try to include, to try to analyze the sustainability of circular economy or the implementation of circular economy. Okay, so and related with that is, and I'm just going to start to finish my presentation. We aim to measure the sustainability of circular economy processes. And for that, what we aim to use is life cycle thinking. You know, I'm going to try to explain this very quick with an example. If, for example, if I want to know the environmental impacts of the computer that I have in front of me, so as a consumer, I may start to think, you know, maybe the electricity that I'm consuming is part of the impacts associated to this computer. And at the end of life, if I take it to a recycling place, I think, well, maybe there is some impacts associated to the end of life of this computer. But actually, there is a lot of environmental, economic, and social aspects associated, for example, to this computer. For example, the electronic part, I'm sure that it has copper, and that copper is probably coming from mining in Chile, and that mining have some environmental impact. So considering all the aspects and all the impacts that is associated to a product, service, or even an organization, that's life cycle thinking, okay? So as I mentioned before, it can be applied to environmental, economic, and social aspect. But for example, if it's from an environmental perspective, what we do is calculate the environmental impacts associated to the extraction of raw materials, the production, the distribution, the use, and the end of life, okay? So I explained you this because in another study, we decided to analyze if from the environmental perspective, it always makes sense to ban or not to ban single-use plastics. You know, I'm sure that all of you have heard that there is some laws that are starting to ban the use of single-use plastics, okay? So what we did, we took this sample of single-use containers that are used in takeaway restaurants. These three are the things that we analyze, which are the most common. This one is from polypropylene. This is the typical clam shell that is normally with burgers, that is from polystyrene, and this one from aluminum, okay? As I said, they are very common, and it's millions of them used in the European Union every year, okay? This will represent the single use, the linear economy, okay? But we saw that in internet, there was a lot of campaigns of bring your own tupper to the takeaway restaurants, okay? And this is the Tupperware that we compare with these three types of single-use containers. And obviously this is reusable, so it represents the circular economy, okay? So I don't have much time, but I want to show you the results. This means how many times do you have to use the reusable container, the Tupperware, in order that we understand it, in order to counteract the impact of the single-use one, okay? The polystyrene from the three that was single-use was the best one from the environmental perspective, okay? So that means that to counteract the impacts of climate change, we have to reuse we have to go 18 times to the takeaway restaurant with our Tupperware, okay? But depending on the impact category, this change. Consumption of resources, which is very clearly related with circular economy, you have to use it up to 208 times, okay? And actually there is one category with this terrestrial ecotoxicity that you never can counteract the impacts of single-use containers, because just cleaning this the Tupperware, the reusable container, have more impact in this specific category, terrestrial ecotoxicity, than producing the polystyrene one, okay? So we can talk about this during the questions, you know. This was quite polemic at some point, this article, but what we are trying to highlight here is that we have to analyze every situation, okay? So things are normally not black or white, so there is gray areas, okay? And with this, I conclude. In the case of the agricultural sector and supply chains, they are still not designed for circular economy. Remember, our article was published last year, and there was still not even a definition of what does it mean circular economy for the agricultural sector. We need to understand very well when circular means sustainable, as I mentioned in several moments of this presentation. Not always being more circular mean being more sustainable, okay? And we have to analyze case by case. For that, it's very important, and particularly in the agricultural sector, is missing to have multidisciplinary and holistic analysis. And for that, life cycle tools are really crucial. And regarding the implementation of circular economy to agriculture is challenging, but is achievable. The drivers are increasing. There is consumers that are requiring more circular and more sustainable products. And circular economy, as I mentioned during this presentation, in the case, for example, of Appeal, is a great inspiration for innovation. Very important in the agricultural sector, is crucial to incentivize regeneration and reduction of food. And methods and technologies are developing, but slowly. We need more success stories, and more success stories in big companies, not only in startups. Legislation will need to get tougher. In this case, the European Union is a very good example of doing things correctly. We already have in the European Union the second circular economy action plan, and it's influencing many of the policies of the European Union. Okay, so I want to thank Adisa, John Manuel, and Juan Francisco that have contributed to this work, and actually some of the slides were from this presentation, and I will obviously always ask our founders in this work some references. And here you have my email, and as I'm very cool and modern guy, my Twitter as well, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Alejandro, for a very fascinating talk there. Yeah, we've got 10 minutes for questions now, so if anybody's got any, do feel free to put them in the chat. In the meantime, we've got a few questions here. Why do you think, Alejandro, why do you think circular economy principles have started to be applied later to agriculture compared to other sectors?
I think that there is several reasons. I think, first of all, there has been much more economic interest in other type of materials, more technical nutrients like plastics, metals, okay, and I think that's have incentivized the development of that part of the circular economy, the blue part of the butterfly diagram of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Okay, I think that's one of the main issues, you know, and I think some of the aspects were more complicated to apply directly to biological nutrients, okay, and that's where agriculture lays, no. But I think it's changing. It's a matter that they have started to have more attention, and you know, like there was some level as well of more development regarding, for example, recycling in metals and plastic, you know, and it's evolving in that part of the circular economy, more towards remanufacturing, refurbishing, reusing, okay, and I think those kind of ideas have started to or have come later to the bioeconomy, but they are starting they're starting to be drivers, and they are starting to be there. So I think it was mainly an economic reason why the other technical nutrients have been developed more from the circular economy perspective.
We've got a thanks, Alejandro. It's really interesting. We've got a good follow-up question from Charles in the chat, who asks, do you have any examples in the UK of farming with lower inputs that is more profitable?
I mean, we didn't focus in the UK specifically, okay, but I think in general what we have seen is that not obviously the moment that you optimize the inputs that you are putting, you know, that's gonna be obviously beneficial from the economic perspective. You know, if you are putting fertilizers that are not needed, you know, you are overdosing fertilizers, you know, that's not going to be helpful, not only from the environmental perspective, but from the economic perspective. The problem is that, and that's what makes this difficult, is that we have been applying this linear economy in agriculture, you know, like with not rotating enough the crops, for example. And now it takes time to nature to recover, you know, and that's the one, it comes financially problematic, you know. You need some years in order that this kind of implementation of these things started to work out, okay. Then it will pay off. Now it pay off in the long run, okay. But we have done so much damage that starting to do things in a different way is complicated, okay, and you need some finance support, you know, to recover the soil, and from there start to produce in a more circular way.
And there's another question kind of related to that from Maggie in the chat, who asks, do you think the crisis in Ukraine and the lack of fertilizer will accelerate reviewing practices?
I think so. Obviously, that's it's terrible, no, what is happening, you know, and obviously the consequences are terrible. But yeah, no, normally this kind of crisis incentivize, you know, that people start to look for different ways of doing things, you know, and obviously if there is a lack of fertilizers associated to the situation that is happening in Ukraine, you know, and that increase the price of fertilizers, you know, that will be a trigger to start to implement this or be using these fertilizers in a much more reasonable and thinking much more how we use those fertilizers.
Thanks. We've got another question from Maggie actually on a different subject, which is she's asking about the slide comparing the single-use versus multi-use tubs. And Maggie asks, does circular economy mean it's impossible for a layperson to make sustainable decisions? It's a good question.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, the thing is that it's possible, but we have to analyze case by case, okay? So at the end, it makes sense to have reusable containers. Maybe what it doesn't have sense is that each consumer have to go with their own Tupperware to the takeaway restaurants, you know. It makes sense that we develop business models that makes things simple to the consumer, you know, and that you can take a Tupperware you can take a quite a strong and reusable container from a restaurant, and you can use it and return it in another restaurant that is next to your house, making things easy for the consumers, that will allow that reusable container is used a lot of times, and counteract the impacts of a single-use container. Okay, so I'm not saying that I'm against single-use plastics, but we have to see, how do we how we develop business models that are helpful for the consumers, and maybe just taking your Tupperware to the takeaway restaurant is not the best solution. I mean, you have to do it 200 times, in order to counteract some of the impacts. Is that really sustainable? I mean, maybe you are really, really conscious about it, but think about taking your Tupperware in your bag 200 times. Okay, so we have to make things that maybe people that is very, very conscious will do that, but is that really feasible for the average consumer? We have to think what is really, we have to pay to make things easy for people, so and definitely there is a lot of things that we can do that make our lives sustainable. Okay, for example, eating less meat is something that is well established, that for example will make our personal environmental footprint much lower. Okay, so what I know that is a provocative example. That's the reason that I bring it here. Okay, what I'm trying to say is that we have to analyze everything, because as I said, it's not a matter of being black or white. There are always gray areas that we have to analyze, so banning single-use plastic, it depends on the situation, and it depends what is the alternative to banning those single-use plastics, for example.
Thank you, Alejandro. We've probably got time for one. Actually, we probably don't have time for one last question. So thank you so much. It's been a really, really interesting talk and discussion there. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll hand over to Jenna now.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, so I suppose my work kind of comes in at the sort of community layperson level. That's where my stuff is now situating itself. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that okay. I'm just going to get rid of you guys in the corner so I can see my screen better. Just move this up a bit. Yeah, so this is, so the work I'm about to show you is part of a wider national programme of different research projects called UK Climate Resilience Programme, and it's funded by the AHRC and Met Office primarily. So this project is called, the long title for the project is called Community Climate Resilience Through Folk Pageantry. The shorter title, which is known locally where we're working, is Creative Climate Resilience. So the photo that you can see on the screen here from the website, and I can actually share this website with you in the chat later because it's just an open resource website that I keep updating with project updates every month. This particular photo at the top here is in the area where we're working, which is in Miles Platting. So it's a political ward in Manchester, Miles Platting, Newton Heath and Collyhurst, and it's roughly about 2 square miles. And as you can see from this photo, it's a real sort of conglomeration really of different interests and difference of demographics living in this area. It is an area that used to be really the heart of the industrial period in the 19th century in Manchester. And obviously in the 20th century, mid 20th century, pretty much all of that industry was then shut down. So what you have left is the kind of mills in the background that again, renovated for fancy flats. You've got 20th century social and council housing stock, and then you've got new housing development that's happening at a really quick pace throughout this area. And as you can imagine, there's lots of sort of issues and tensions that kind of come up from that. So yes, I just kind of wanted to give you a bit of sense of where we're working. So this project, and I'm just going to kind of scroll through this resource, give you a sense of the kind of work that we've been doing, where we're up to at the moment, and kind of what's next. So this is my project update from June 2022. So initially it started as a 24-month project, but because of COVID, we've had a further 12-month extension. So we're actually carrying on until July 2023. As I say, it's funded by AHRC and Met Office, and it's an arts-led research project focusing on community knowledge and creativity to deliver a Manchester, UK case study, responding directly to its climate action policies and community contexts. And the reason for that really is that we found that what's really interesting in contrast to Alejandro's presentation, which is all about systems, what we were finding is that in Manchester, there seems to be a lot of climate action conversation kind of focusing on communities at the sort of community residential level about what communities and residents should or should not be doing to impact climate change, rather than these kind of bigger system conversations. So we were interested in sort of thinking about, okay, well, let's try and test some of this and explore this more in depth in a particular area in Manchester that actually has high health deprivation statistics, high levels of poverty. It's also a food desert as well in the Miles Platting area of this ward. So the project builds on existing practices of the researchers, me, obviously, and my co-Is, Professor Kevin Malone and Professor Sarah Lindley, across areas of climate and social justice, geography, gardening, mapping, performance, puppetry, music composition, socially engaged arts practices, and intangible and material heritages. So that's just a kind of potted summary of that, and you can click, as I say, I'll pop this in the chat because I'm not going to be able to go through all of this because it's quite a lot of information here. You can find other kind of, you can find our biographies, but you can also find information on other collaborating artists that are leading on some other kind of specialist stuff within the project, and also our kind of wider partners, one of which is the Manchester City Council. So these are the questions that we're investigating then. So how can socially engaged arts and community-based performance methods identify barriers and solutions and articulate perspectives to initiating climate mitigation and adaptation strategies? These are some of that's the kind of top liner question, I suppose. And then we've got some of these other sub questions around, how creative methods can improve new processes and tools and skills by which community climate resilience adaptation targets can be more effectively attained. What's the transferability of these techniques? How can creative practices be embedded within local policy consultation processes towards inclusive engagement? What do we also learn about modes of resilience from residents in an area of high deprivation, and what sort of new artivism forms, spaces and outcomes emerge from this kind of interdisciplinary approach around climate action? And this is the resilience description that we're subscribing to. So defining resilience as the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. So in terms of outcomes and outputs, depending on how you think about these things, we have arts practice-led outputs, so our kind of community pageant events, including performances, film, installations. We have legacy plans as well that are significant outputs, open access website repository with materials, performance packs, toolbox for creative methods within policy and neighbourhood management, and then some other more obvious stuff, more kind of traditional stuff like co-authored papers and a project book, and recommendations of transferability and so on. So kind of really it's a sort of package of different things, sort of practice-based outputs and then other kinds of published outputs. Again, trying to sort of connect the work for different audiences in different ways. So in terms of what we've been up to, so COVID, the project started right during COVID. So the first 8 months really sort of really kind of threw our plans up in the air because ideally when I do this type of work, you know, it's about being embedded within an area. It's about making connections with people very, very early on. And of course we couldn't do that through COVID. So a lot of this was sort of taking place really across Zoom with different gatekeepers, with local city council representatives, other kind of charity representatives, and actually just sort of getting a sense of what was going on in the ward as best we could socially, without actually being able to connect with any of the residents at that point. And actually what we found quite interesting during the COVID period is that we could actually connect with gatekeepers, as I'll call them, far more easily actually than we would have necessarily been able to in practice, which is interesting because there's not the excuses of being in the town hall, for example. You know, they're on Zoom, you can get them really easily. So that was an interesting difference. And I also joined some of the teams on their kind of neighbourhood, the NHS teams on the neighbourhood walkabouts, when they were asking people to, you know, still be wearing a face mask and washing your hands and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was very much kind of getting a sense of what was going on in the ward, socially, culturally, around any kind of climate conversation, and also how people were coping during COVID, because we knew this was going to have a huge effect on the project as well. So yeah. And then for the following 4 months after that, when COVID vaccinations sort of, you know, began and you could have one-to-one, you know, walkabouts with people, we started then doing some more kind of one-to-one stuff, and again, trying to kind of build up those connections. Then the 5 months between August 2021 to December, that was when in place practice really sort of kicked off properly with people, a lot of different types of workshops coming together, and sort of planning and sharing the work that we were doing. And then these last 4 months since January 2022 have been pretty intensive. So how we're thinking about the project obviously is, because it was 24 months originally, we're kind of seeing, you know, our work really being sort of 2/3 of the way through in relation to our original kind of work package ideas. So I won't go through all of this. You can have a look at this in your own in your own sweet time if you really want to. But this is a way of me also documenting what's happening in the project and sort of trying to keep on top of the different types of interactions and encounters and relationships with people that might not sit within all the sort of planned activity that we've been doing. So I'm going to talk through or just show you some of the methods, because as I say, this is a kind of transdisciplinary project really, and we're pulling together a lot of different methods across this, and they're all kind of interacting with each other and interconnecting with each other to sort of think through the research questions. So one of the big ones is place exploration. So visiting, walking, observing, field notes, documenting, collecting, talking, listening, eating with people, leafleting, which, you know, sounds funny, but actually you really get to know a place when you're leafleting. Litter picking is an obvious one for some people in this area, and then other kind of GIS analysis. And the purpose really of this kind of place exploration, it has a number of different intentions really behind it. So it's about connecting with residents, understanding uses of space, you know, what are the site activities, what are local interests that are being expressed, are there any kind of rituals or traditions that is taking place very clearly within place, understanding typologies or distinctiveness to an area, any evident creativity or artistry, etc., etc. So for all the methods that we are applying or are emerging, they have very specific sort of intentions behind them. The Rochdale Canal, just to make the point, the Rochdale Canal is actually a really important kind of connecting thread for us through this particular area of Manchester, and that was in the summer last year. Another method then, which actually kind of came out from resident interest, was around increased heritage interpretation around the canal. So yeah, 2 of my students kind of connected into the project to do this extra piece of work that came out through resident interests. So really trying to sort of connect people with the canal culturally, socially, support engagement for active participation and care and knowledge of the canal. And then, by that nature, connecting into how the waterways support climate mitigation and adaptation. And waterways as places of multi-species living as well. There are very little opportunities for encounters with non-human nature within this ward in terms of sort of animal-based non-human nature. The geese on the canal are the kind of primary animal that people encounter. So so anyway, all of this is kind of connecting into the canal. The other method then, which obviously coming out of our arts-based research, are a series of community art workshops. And again, a number of different types of materials and practices being explored here. So the purpose, and again, the use of this is for identifying, building trust, connectivity, friendships, local food consumption and production. Sorry, it's my dog in the background. Different types of storytelling and memory work. And a lot of these workshops are also connecting into thinking about how do you support family vulnerability, as well. How do you support vulnerable families to connect into these kinds of conversations around climate action and community action? Then we have a more recent method, if you like, parading. So one of our recent activities, which also involved obviously creative arts workshops, was to connect into the local St. George's Day Parade. Now, the St. George's Day Parade has actually been run in the area for 17 years by local residents, obviously not during COVID, so this was the first time after COVID. And we just saw a really interesting opportunity to connect the work into a different interest group, into supporting something as well that was resident-led. And I think we can definitely say this is the first time that there was a kind of representation of climate action in St. George's Day Parade in Manchester. So our section was called Our Green and Pleasant Land, sort of playing on the William Blake poem. And again, so yeah, sort of reinterpreting traditional folk mythologies, reframing patriotism, connecting to new interest groups, and so on. And there's a 5-minute film in this resource that you can click into and watch in your own time, and it just kind of gives a little bit of a background to the project and what we did within that. Some few photos for you here. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to kind of whiz through the next section. So as part of our work, we're also doing recorded interviews and stories. And then this is very much feeding into 2 other methods. So the work that my colleague Kevin Malone does with audio interviews. He passes different phrases and sort of goes through these audio interviews, sort of doing kind of thematic analysis, but also thinking about them in terms of their musical qualities as well. And he's creating sound pieces from those interviews and from those themes, which then are being animated. Not all of them, but some of them are being animated. And again, this is about being able to share back with people the kind of content, but in a kind of visually stimulating way, a way of heightening emotional and psychological aspect of data, and increasing the depth and longevity of the impact of that data. It's also, an interesting way of people hearing themselves back and the kinds of stories that other people around them are telling. Then we have some other more sort of geographers in the room, GIS, spatial analysis and biodiversity data analysis. And this is sort of Sarah's neck of the woods, really her specialism. And she is kind of applying this work in terms of climate justice to very specific areas of the ward that we're identifying in collaboration with residents that we feel need some additional sort of focus. So for example, there's an area that is a 46 acre site that was rewilded. It used to be a Jackson Brickworks, and then it was turned into a waste dump, and then it sort of rewilded itself, but now it's being redeveloped for housing. So Sarah's helping us to do an analysis of what potentially what is going to be that, the impact of that for urban heat or any kind of fluvial flooding, or how can we support the process of improving this development design? Is there any way of doing that? And then where we're up to right now, then, as I say, this work has got another 12 months to run yet, but where we're up to now is the pageant part 1. So we're having part 2 next year. So following on actually from the St. George's Day Parade contribution, we're also calling it Our Green and Pleasant Land, because that seemed to resonate with people. So this is on the 2nd of July, and it's going to be a half-day celebration of community knowledge, creativity and care discovered by the project so far, located at Sandal Green in Mars Platting. So it's a mini community arts, climate arts festival with ecology and climate action themed puppetry performances, dancing and music. And we're going to have a circus tent which will contain other kind of climate and environmental themed community stalls and installations, etc. And we'll be showing our animations and film. So for the current month, this is what my days look like. So lots of puppet making with people in the ward, with residents. And this is the area where we're going to be performing. And again, these ridges are actually buried mounds of an ex estate that used to be on this site, and this site will probably end up being redeveloped again as well at some point. So there are lots of these kind of green patches everywhere, particularly in Mars Platting, and part of what we're doing with residents is sort of trying to look at whether any of these can be saved as community assets. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. It really is a challenge to try and do that. So as part of our pageant, then, we have a strong character of the Sparrow Child, which will also be a puppet, or bird children driving the pageant as its narrators and dreamers, inviting parents and elders into their worlds of imagination and observation around the streets of Mars Platting and Newton Heath, connecting the important stories and threads we've identified to imagine and to propose care and adaptation for our green and pleasant land. And as I say, the pageant's concept and narrative builds on a collaborative residency I did in Stoke-on-Trent for the Ceramics Biennial last year, but also from the St. George's Day Parade contribution and creative writing. You can read this in your own time. I won't read it here, but this is called The Ballad of St. George. So this is a piece that I've just written coming out of the kind of St. George's Day Parade stuff. The kind of retelling of the St. George mythology, but for our time, I guess. You can read that in your own time, and that will be coming out in a Manchester zine, hopefully in June, in this month. So. And then, so what's coming up then? So I think what's really important to emphasize is that all of this work is feeding into the local climate action plan for the neighbourhood. So we're working really closely with the local climate officer and Manchester City Council neighbourhood team to really think about how this work and the findings from this work can feed into that local action plan. So where we're up to at the moment is doing some tentative analysis and writing up of some early findings and reflections in response to the research questions. And again, as I just say, interpretation for then the climate action plan of focusing on social movement around climate action in this area, in Mars Platting and Newton Heath. And we've identified these particular themes that are obviously really pertinent for thinking about resilience, or people's resilience in the area. So sustainable and low cost energy, low cost and sustainable housing, including retrofit and eco new builds, food provision, local ecosystem health, which connects people's health with greening, biodiversity agendas and mitigating heat and flood risks. Poverty of income and health and educational opportunities sit in the centre of all of this, and as a kind of resulting symptom, with additional mistrust resulting disengagement from local politics. So we have some big issues within this area. As I just mentioned, we're going to be doing a lot of puppetry making over these coming weeks, and various other things that we're kind of finishing off that. I don't have to read through, but we're also contributing to the Royal Geographical Society conference coming up in Newcastle. There's also going to be a showcase in Hull taking place in September, and another symposium that I'm contributing to with some of this work. And I think I'll leave it there. That was a very quick whiz through, but I'm very happy to share this with people if you want to sort of ponder ponder any of this and yeah, and look at it in more detail. So.
Thanks, Jenna. That was really interesting, and it's a fascinating project. Really helping to engage with some communities you wouldn't normally engage with environmental issues and activism. It's really interesting. Once again, if you've got any questions, do stick them in the chat. And thank this. Oh yeah, Jenna's just posted a link there to that document. Thanks, I'll have a look at that myself. It's really, especially the bits about Stoke-on-Trent, which is where I'm from.
Oh really? Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, that was a kind of an extra little thing again that sort of cropped up last year as part of the ceramics biennial, and but it was really helpful actually because we were working with residents again. It was a sort of embedded residency in one of the artist-led galleries there, and yeah. Anyway, so it kind of provided food for thought around some of the stuff that then we were going to be starting to do in Manchester. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant, excellent. So a few questions then. What kind of challenges did you encounter through the project, or have you encountered?
Yeah, I kind of hinted at a few of them. I suppose in terms of where we're doing the work, yeah, there's high levels of poverty. Political apathy is really high. So generally speaking, on local council elections, only about 11% of people ever turn out for to vote. So we have that on one side, and then on the other side, you also have some rather disengaged local members, council members, a little bit challenging. But as I say, we've got a really good relationship with the neighbourhood wards team, which are the kind of permanent staff, if you like, in the city council. So that's kind of on the sort of political side of things. I think other challenges, which are actual kind of positive challenges, if that's the way of putting it, is through, because this work is so collaborative and through co-production, there's been some really amazing different things coming out in terms of different types of arts practice and artists working together, or arts-based researchers working together, that we couldn't have foreseen really in terms of what emerges from some of that. And yeah, so there's lots of learning that's coming out of the complexity and assemblage of everything, which of course is a challenge to kind of keep a hold on in a way. So that's kind of one of the main challenges actually, is keeping a hold on all the different strands of how things are tripping off into other conversations or other projects that might be on the horizon, or different interests and so on. It's just kind of trying to hold all of that simultaneously, and give enough attention to all of those different stakeholders and different participants and residents. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Another question: do you see any differences between arts-based research and art in general?
Yeah, so actually what I'll do, which might be quite helpful, particularly for people who aren't arts-based researchers in the room, I'm just going to flick up an image. So this is a figure that's from Patricia Levy. So Patricia Levy is an arts-based researcher and sociologist, and this is from her book Method Meets Art, or Art Meets Method. I can't remember which way around it is, but she's done quite a nice, succinct kind of categorization here, really, of the differences in terms of intentions behind different approaches. So the sort of, because often what ends up happening is a kind of apples versus pears type discussion around, quantitative versus arts-based methods and so on. So she's done a really interesting kind of breakdown of all of this, I think. So in terms of arts-based research, I think, yeah, what's really important is we've got all of these different elements here that we're interested in as researchers. And essentially what we're driving towards and trying to make sense of is creating and generating new knowledge for particular pertinent research questions, and contributing new knowledge towards research challenges. Whereas an artist who's just working in a kind of, from whatever sort of personal motivation, or it might be a kind of social motivation as well, but they're not accountable to any research questions, or they're not necessarily accountable to the bigger system in which they're working, and it can be, yeah, so that's I suppose the main difference. I mean, artists are naturally rigorous researchers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be responding to a set of research questions or research agenda that's set for them. So yeah.
Thanks for that. And just sort of a continue of that really is, do you have any suggestions for researchers that want to explore arts-based research approaches in their work?
Yeah, so I just mentioned Patricia Levy before, and actually I think she's got, and so I'm not, I'm getting commissioned from promoting Patricia's work, just to say, but I found her work actually is really great it's really accessible for non-arts based researchers. So yeah, so she's got a couple of books, Methods Meets Art, and then a kind of handbook of arts based research, which is an edited collection. And it's just really kind of clearly articulated, I think. And yeah, that would probably be the best place to go, really, if you're really new to it and you want to kind of just work through some of the, the questions or the queries or the, yeah, anything. I would suggest going to her work first. Yeah, and there's a couple of really great YouTube talks by her as well, say for people who are really kind of fresh to this. Also, I'm really happy to chat to people as well, if folks want a kind of, more of a one-to-one insight of things, or just some sort of suggestions of what they might be able to activate in their own projects. So.
Alejandro, you just raised your hand. Do you have a question for?
More than a question, is just a suggestion. I highly encourage you. I don't know if you are in contact with them already, but Sarah Mander and Angela Minas from Tyndall, from the Tyndall Center at the University of Manchester, I'm sure they will be very interested in your work, because they are analyzing a grassroots movement associated to climate change. So I mean, I put it in the chat, but you were presenting support.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I mean, I know Carly from the Tyndall. I'm actually doing a Q&A for the Blue Dot with Carly, so around her work in the music industry and so on. So, but yeah, no, I don't know those other folks. So yeah, I'll reach out to them. Thank you.
No problem.
Somebody's asking in the chat if they could just post the name of that art-based researcher.
Yeah, sure. I'll pop it in here for you. It's Patricia Levy.
Brilliant, thank you. So, if anyone else has got any other questions, I think that's the end of the questions I've got. So, if there was any more questions, I think we should just thank both Alejandro and Jenna for some fantastic talks. Really varied. It's great to hear, and I look forward to hearing more of them. So, yeah, in future sessions. So, thank you very much, everybody.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.